Nyami Rinpoche Sadhu Sunju Le Tenga Zawa Jeju Sunju Lam Dala Kojo Ganji Nye Tachu Tangji Zawa Te Marang Songa Nyami Tangji Zawa Te Jerung Gambar Seba Jerung Ganta Zorung Gambar Seba Jeju Sunju Lam Dala Kojo Ganji Nye Kayos Nyami Tangji Zawa Jerung Marang Lüde Yadahaya Guru Gambar Seba Atela Jerums and Yadahaya Guru Gam Chali Niamba Song and Tala and Yadahaya Guruma Durhams in the Tony Mona Temple then Shania Tong Harlonga so Zorum Gambar Seba and Jesu Sunju Song and the La Kojo Ganji.
Continuing now with the fifth song or the fifth chapter from among the teachings of Kamachaka, which is the union of Dzogchen and Mahamudra. He begins this chapter with the words, "The essential meaning is the path of generation and completion process and their union. And there's of course something to be known, something to be understood or comprehended, and then there is what has to be put into practice, what has to be meditated upon." When we speak about development process meditation, also known by its Tibetan name of Cherrim, then this is the sort of meditation in the course of which we imagine ourselves in the shape of a Yidam deity. We imagine ourselves to appear in that shape. We perform certain mantra repetitions, etc., go through the various motions of that practice, and eventually dissolve that imagination, that picture which we have created of ourselves as the Yidam deity. This dissolving of the imagination is called the dissolution process, which is also known as Drime in Tibetan, which is part of the Cherrim, which is the development process meditation. It's basically the final part of development. Once we have then dissolved ourselves as the deity and rest with our minds in the natural empty state, we would practice according to whatever instructions we have received, either shamatha or shina meditation as it is known in Tibetan, or vipassana or laptong meditation, or a whole variety of other practices. All of these practices which follow the dissolution of the development process of our imagination of ourselves as the deity come under the general heading of perfection process meditation, or Dzogchen as it's known by its Tibetan term. And as Kamachaka points out, before one sets out with such practices, of course there are first things to be understood, things to be comprehended, and once we have comprehended these things, these various points, we have to put them into practice, which means we have to meditate upon them.
Sentin kanje, seni mo na, yeni sunji mo yupate, sentin tangji ke semdala, mo na, yeni taba, semge mu ke chala, lo ke jaba tani maguba, yeni taba yemi na, sunji tangji ke mu chot yuba. And Sonji Topas, Ju, Manorwa, and Erkam Terrashi, Nimu, Sentin Tongi, Senji, the Yoyo, Tela, and Epana, Sentin, Zami, and then Tipa, Mike, Yewa, Atenda, Roma, Bernatata, Yarin is a year, Sentin, and then the Mongo Tola, Yamba, Yona, Yena, Yam. This happened in Watella, then there was more than Glover, Maru and Jojo. Tata Sonji Tane, then Basonji Tao, Ho and set to Blaz, Sanji Tareke, and Sonji Tanji, Ishiki Tala, more than the ground Zangro Masoma, and Rejuke Nila Yeke, Mota, Nindo Masoma, Yen Logo, Maruba,
All sentient beings' mind essence is, since the very beginning, the very essence of Buddhahood itself, says Rinpoche in his text. Which, as we have so often heard before, simply means to say that all beings, not a single one excluded, are endowed with that which we call Buddha potential, Buddha nature. In this regard, beings are not different from each other at all. It doesn't matter what sort of being you could possibly think of. If it is a sentient being, a being that is endowed with mind, with consciousness, then that Buddha potential is there. It is present within this being. It doesn't make a difference here whatsoever whether this is a human being or an animal. It doesn't make any difference whatsoever whether you are born in a female or in a male body. It doesn't make any difference whatsoever in which realm within samsara you are born. All of these beings, wherever they might find themselves within samsara, are endowed with that Buddha nature to an equal extent. Even beings who, for instance, at the moment might find themselves in the hell realms, undergoing the unspeakable sufferings of hell, their Buddha nature is in no way inferior to the Buddha nature of beings who are born in higher realms with lesser suffering. And it is not the case that their Buddha nature is in any way more obscured or in any way deteriorates any more through the suffering which they presently undergo. The Buddha nature of all beings, no matter of what type they might be, is primordially pure, unsullied in any which way whatsoever, and it is simply the various obscurations, the various sufferings that beings experience at any given time which make a little difference. Otherwise, they're exactly the same in that regard. On the other hand, it is also true that all the great awakened beings of the past who have appeared in the world have also had that very same Buddha potential. The Buddhas of the past, like Krapachanda or Kanaka Muni, etc. and so forth, their Buddha nature or their Buddha potential has not in any way been improved through their demonstrating the awakening of Buddhahood. And this way, all beings are of the same nature, so to speak, namely by way of their being endowed with the potential for the achievement of the awakening of Buddhahood. So in this regard, there is no difference between them. It is not the case that Buddha nature is present to a greater extent in some being and to a lesser extent in other beings, that it is worthier in some and unworthier in others. The potential is exactly the same. That is to be understood, that, as Kamachagna says, the very essence of the mind of all beings is, since the very beginning, essentially that of Buddhahood.
我呢东巴荣兴茶呢沙瓦沙中双顿就被茶呢啊火瓦当两面人这个去当的芒果吧那说说茶容啊那说说弄用他这了这个人这了呢这个龙骨这个说那龙骨生物问的了也呢让其说参与
As we have heard before already, our consciousness has, since the very beginning, since primordial times, forever been endowed with the qualities of mind nature which are known as the Four Buddhakayas. The Four Kayas, which are the Buddha bodies, or the expression of Buddhahood by way of the Dharmakaya, the Sambhogakaya, the Nirmanakaya, and the essence of these three, which is known as the Four Buddhakayas. And accordingly, Changpa Rinpoche explains this by way of saying that the empty essence of mind, of being's mind nature, is the Dharmakaya, which has no origination, or which is birthless. Which means to say that if we were to look at mind itself, mind nature itself, if we were to examine it properly, we would come to realize it as completely empty of whatever characteristics we could possibly try to dump onto it. If we were to look at mind, we would clearly see there is no shape. It is neither square, nor round, nor longish or shortish. It doesn't have any particular color. It is not red or blue or yellow or anything. And also it does not have any particular place of origination. If we were to look at this mind of ours, we would not find any particular place or circumstance from which it arises. Consequently, it also doesn't have any particular place or circumstance where or under which it dwells. And again, consequently, there also is no cessation of this mind. It does not disappear to somewhere. It does not go off into the void in any which particular way. In this way, mind nature is empty, which is nothing other but the Dharmakaya aspect of mind. Being empty, however, does not mean that it is just a voidness, devoid of anything whatsoever. Of course, if we look closely, we also find that there is a very clear, a very vivid quality to it. It is the basis for everything that we perceive. It is the very basis for the ability of our perceiving anything of whatever sort. And that being the case, it is called the clarity aspect of mind, or Sambhogakaya for that matter. The very union of these two, which is an indivisible one, is known as the Nirmanakaya, which manifests in the way of all sorts of perceptions, and which also manifests predominantly as what we know as compassion. So in this way it has the ability to manifest in all sorts of different ways, which are termed the Nirmanakaya. And accordingly, Kamachakna says here in the corresponding three lines which go with these three kayas, the empty essence of mind is the birthless Dharmakaya. Its clear, distinct appearances are what we call the Sambhogakaya, and its unceasing compassion or manifestation is the variegated Nirmanakaya.
Saraha tang tongpa ni songtun jukpa, taji mayin songtun jukpa. Songtun jukpa, satong songtun jukpa chayin, teni tukjen na so zhulukot, tesong de chuku ge chayin zhongma yinbi na, tesong yerme pa chayin teni ngo ni jukko zhongma yinbi, chuku lungku chuku ngo ni jukko, 나윤들이 대화체비고 다 아랑송게 산라 추고롱고 추고모니 거제 거기에 나윤 저와요 말 대니라 대니 동할 괜찮아요 말 대연들 두 다도 나랑 총게 두기야 나랑 총게 산 Tenga 그 얘기 뭐지는 요요해.
Now these three, Dharmakaya, Sambhogakaya, Nirmanakaya, as we have heard, are an inseparable unity. Even though they're described as the first, the second, and the third, they are not to be divided. They cannot be separated in any which way. It is not the case that each of them is a separate entity unto itself. It is not as if Dharmakaya and Sambhogakaya are in any which way different, or that Nirmanakaya is any other than the union of Sambhogakaya and Dharmakaya. If we look at mind nature and realize it to be empty of any characteristics whatsoever, if we come to truly experience it as birthless, as not dwelling anywhere in particular, and as free of any cessation, we realize its empty nature, but that is the very basis for its ability to manifest. That is the very basis for its vivid clarity. And this vivid clarity, again, gives rise to and allows for manifestation of what hath sought. And it continuously does manifest in all sorts of different ways. So the Dharmakaya, the empty Dharmakaya aspect, is part and parcel of that which is the vivid clarity aspect, which is the Sambhogakaya, and its ability of continuous manifestation is Nirmanakaya. So in this regard, these three may be described separately under different names, yet are essentially of one and the same nature. They share the same essence, or they have the same essence of being essentially empty of whatever characteristics one could possibly dream up. Therefore, the very unity of these three is known as the essence body, or this is called with the Sanskrit term Svabhavikakaya, the essential body. Now these three, being an indivisible unity, also includes the fact that them sharing the basic quality of being empty of any self-nature, empty of any characteristics whatsoever, there can be no suffering. There can be no experience of suffering in any way whatsoever. Of course, that which is empty, how could it be the basis for suffering? How could it be hurt in any which way? Such a thing is utterly impossible, is utterly unheard of, and therefore this eternal changelessness of these four bodies, or the three bodies which are summarized into the fourth, the essential body, the Svabhavikakaya, is also known as the body of great bliss or great happiness, or by its Sanskrit term, the Mahasukhakaya. Where there is no basis for any suffering whatsoever, there is continuous, everlasting well-being. And that is called the Mahasukhakaya, the body of great bliss or great happiness.
Yeni ranga rangji yubati ta ko yeye namba semgo montela ko yeye namba yoya bati yeni ranga rangji ge so senjin tongji ge senji de Tenga yoyo ge ma do ge songji ge tuji la ene arong song ge san ko ye chang yong wang 말에 랑게 자을라면 산나라 되네 양아랑게 산나 꾸이 남바 저도 요요 대형 말이 규제 사기저들 다니 조롱게 잘라서 규제 당만 체발쟁아 네되네 양아랑게 산데 꾸이 남바 요바 대형 간 말에 이시 되니 제사에 봐이 예 데마 내가로 통해 산다라 그 이런 기술 요바디 예 대만이 요래.
Kamachaka goes on to say, this primordial presence within beings, within ourselves, was neither created by the Buddha's great compassion, nor by the blessing of our teachers, of our gurus, nor was it created by particularly, or through the influence of particularly profound Dharma instructions. It is not the case that these four kayas of which we have heard have been brought into being through our contact with Dharma teachers or Buddhas or through their blessing in any which way whatsoever. We might by all means say, as we have also heard before, that, well, even though it might not have been through the kindness of the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas or masters of the past who we were not fortunate enough to meet, surely it is through the blessing and inspiration of our own teachers, of our root gurus, through which these qualities arise within ourselves. But that would be a wrong idea, that would be a wrong view. It's not even through the blessing or inspiration of the teacher that these qualities of our mind nature, that the four kayas and their particular qualities appear within ourselves. Nor is it the case that they appear within ourselves through the receiving of particularly profound Dharma instructions. All of these things, all of these circumstances are not the reason for the appearance of our Buddha nature, for that matter, or of the four kayas. They are not being brought about by that. They are rather, as Kamachakma says quite clearly, primordially present within our being. We have forever been endowed with this potential. It does not come about through the blessing of a great master or through particularly profound teachings or anything of that sort. Rinpoche closes this verse with the line, all sutras and tantras are in agreement on this. Which means to say that indeed all sentient beings of whatever sort they could possibly be are forever, have forever been endowed with this Buddha potential, have forever been endowed with the potential of these Buddhakayas, of these various kayas, which are aspects of their, which are nothing other but various aspects of their mind nature. The Buddha himself has taught this in the sutra tradition, which includes the teachings on Vinaya, the Sutrayana, the Abhidharma, etc. He has clearly pointed out time and again that all beings since beginningless time have forever had that potential, period. Also in all the Tantra teachings, which includes the four classes of Tantra, the Kriya Tantra, Charya Tantra, and we have the Yoga Tantra, and then the highest unsurpassable Tantra class known as the Anuttara Yoga Tantra. All of these Tantras teach in that regard the very same thing, namely that Buddha potential has in equal measure forever been present in each and every single being. If we look back at the stories of the great accomplished beings of India, the famous Mahasiddhas of India, there are often this talk of the 80 or also of the 82 Mahasiddhas. The very first of these, no matter how one might enumerate them, are the great Brahmin Saraha and another one who was known and famous under the name of Kukuripa. The Buddha himself, shortly before his passing away, prophesied that in the future, a certain number after his parinirvana, after his passing away, two beings would appear on an island that was known as the Gold Islands, Buddhanature. Their names, their Sanskrit names completely escape us, Drupje and Tokse in Tibetan. And the Buddha prophesied that these two special beings would be greatly beneficial in the spreading of the Buddha's teaching.
And community is a low chair and Tambu and Hindu true young Papa young. The age Songjira Tebayo. Number true young Papa Korong dance and say that Chene and Koroni Sambala. Tatu Jamni Sula Tiguyona Hindu onsu chembola teguna yana tamba songji la tegu sola tina garendo coming the song tesamyor.
So according to the Buddha's prophecy, then the number of years that he had specified after his passing away, 2 sons were born at that particular place, Buddhanature, the Gold Island, to an extremely prosperous and influential couple. They were very prosperous, influential people, had everything one could possibly think of, so they didn't want in any which way whatsoever. And they, the wife, of course, gave birth to 2 sons. These 2 sons, as was the custom at the time for a prosperous family of that kind, underwent a very thorough education. And as in these parts of the world, and at that time it was the custom, first of all, they studied all the various precepts, the various teachings of the Hindu tradition. After they had completed their Hinduistic studies, they developed faith in the teaching of the Buddha, and they also studied the Buddha's teachings thoroughly. When eventually they actually sat down together, the 2 of them, and started to think about what would be the more beneficial thing, to place themselves under the protection, to go for refuge to the main deity of the Hindu tradition, the god Maheshvara, or possibly to go for guidance to the Buddha. In this way, these 2 were musing. In the Buddhist tradition, it is the case that one of the most sacred spots in the world is regarded to be the mountain that we all know as Mount Kailash, or Mount Tise. Mount Kailash is considered to be the seat of the deity Chakasambhara and his consort. That is according to the Buddhist view. The same mountain is also venerated by followers of the Hindu tradition, in which it is considered to be the seat of that main deity of the Hindu tradition, Maheshvara, and his consort. So the 2 of the brothers were still musing whether or not to follow rather more the tradition of Maheshvara, the Hindu tradition, or the Buddhist tradition. And they finally decided, let's go on a pilgrimage to the seat of the gods themselves. Let's go on a pilgrimage to Mount Kailash, where supposedly the god Maheshvara and his consort reside, and let's just ask them. And they'll tell us what the best course of action would be, so there will be no more doubt. They set out, as so many other people, on that rather lengthy and difficult pilgrimage, and eventually then came to Mount Kailash, which, as we all know, is in western Tibet. And as they arrived there, on a beautiful meadow, they met a beautiful young woman who was at that particular moment busying herself with collecting flowers. They approached her and they asked her, "Who are you?" And she replied, "I'm the goddess Umadevi, who happens to be the consort of the god Maheshvara himself." And she asked them back, "Who are you then?" And they said, "Well, we're the brothers so-and-so, and we have come in order to meet Maheshvara to ask him an essential question." To which the goddess replied, "Well, you will have to wait a little bit. He'll be around soon, so just hang in there and you'll meet him soon enough." So the two of them settled in, and then a while later, around midday, from the eastern direction, a white cloud appeared, upon which rode the god Maheshvara. In this way, as he had alighted from his cloud, they went into his presence, and he asked them, "Who are you two who have come from such a long distance? Who are you? What are you here for?" They again introduced themselves as the brothers Drime, and they said, "We have come here to ask you an essential question. We have equal faith and devotion in the teachings of your own tradition, the Hinduistic tradition of Maheshvara, as well as into the teachings of the Buddha. And the thing that we can just not decide for ourselves is which of the two will in the end be the more beneficial. So we have come all that way in order to ask you these questions." Having been asked the question, the god Maheshvara answered very clearly. He said, "If you go for refuge and guidance to me, I can bestow upon you many, many different sorts of accomplishments. However, if you wish to become free from compulsory rebirth among hell beings and hungry ghosts, if you wish to break out of the cycle of suffering that is known as samsara, then very clearly you have to go for refuge to the Buddha and his teaching."
사실 다니 추구가 다니 쇼판다고 지는 다니 폰이 된다 밥용하네. 다들 당지라 희라 장도.
Now, as the god Maheshvara had answered the question of the two brothers, he also said, well, it's almost time now for me to make an offering of food to the followers of the Buddha, so please wait around a little. And immediately he started to emanate all sorts of servants, among them a very corpulent cook who had the miraculous ability of very quickly producing all sorts of wonderful sorts of foods and dishes, etc., and so forth. And a large amount of food was laid out. There were large amounts of all sorts of sweets, large amounts of all sorts of rather more sour foods, but predominantly there were lots and lots of vegetables. All of this was decked out in the most perfect fashion. Maheshvara himself took great care and checked everything, that everything was in order. And as everything was then properly arranged, he folded his hands at his heart, he spoke a request, and out of the skies appeared, flying on their Dharma robes as if there were wings, 500 arhats, 500 followers of the Buddha, who then immediately proceeded to partake of the meal that was being offered them.
아니다. 이러지 자는 약간 소수 니라 ペタ와. 아니 도진도 저기 공이 주용네. 단 다족게 자니데 덴바 송지라 지순족고로상. 아니 세자진전 희바 디린난 그런 게는 담바슈. 아니 그런 야도 용게 아니 조세는 lon제 당지 파만이가 양일인데 자니 셔차니 아니 조세는 lon제 다 세가라 그니 아니 토증기 아니 다가 나린다가 아니 출대 전부 들어가서 아니 이것들이요 아니 라지기리요 저도 나린다 출대 전부서요 고대 토증기 이긴가 저기 뒤에 아니 자가 도지 딩게 체진도네 당지 딩게 정말 토진저 저때니 저기 사라하네 저기 저기 kokko서 바네 어다데 공만 많이 된다와 송지게 된다 사와다 전문자가네.
After the meal that was offered by Maheshvara to the 500 arhats was concluded, all of these arhats then eventually went back to their own place. And it also became time for the two brothers, Drupje and Toktim, to return to their native country. So back they went to India, and having now clearly understood that the teaching of the Buddha is the one to follow in order to rid yourself of all suffering in order to liberate you from suffering and its causes, they decided to further their studies in that regard. When they came back to India, they both went into the presence of Rahul, who was the son of the Buddha himself, who was still around at that time, who had become one of the leading monks of the monk Sangha or Hmong Buddhists in India. And from Rahul, the Buddha's son himself, they received ordination. The son who was known, in the meantime also their parents had passed away and they had come into their inheritance, which as brothers they had divided equally, so they were not without means. And Tokse, the one of the two sons, eventually went to Nalanda, which is in northern India, which was the leading monastic university of its time, and furthered his studies there and his practice there. And he eventually became the great Mahasiddha, who's known as the great Brahmin or Saraha. Drupje himself stayed rather closer to Buddha.E and the various spots around there and studied and practiced there, and he eventually became the Mahasiddha Kukuripa. Now it is time again to train ourselves, at least for a few short moments, in what we call shamatha or Shinna meditation, in order to bring about a peaceful, quiescent state of mind. And to that end, as we have done previously, we imagine the Buddha and his golden radiance in front of us, above ourselves in space, and we would again focus upon his heart center.
Nalinda, Nalinda, then Saraha, Kono Aba, and just in the Kaya, but then Totu Seka Guni, and Nalinda, Sarah, Ambo, then some then Kamba Zong, German Deng, Saraha.
There's a point to clarify, which most of us didn't get quite clearly, which makes it very clear now. At the time when the two brothers had taken ordination and had come into the inheritance of their parents, which they had shared equally, it was Tokse, who was to become Saraha, who went to the place that was eventually to become Nalanda. At that time, there was no Nalanda yet. So with his share of what he had inherited, of the wealth of his parents, he basically laid the foundation of what was to become the world-famous Nalanda University. Similarly, Drupje, who went to Buddha.E, the place where the Buddha himself had achieved enlightenment, also that place was not marked in any particular way. In all likelihood, maybe there was a small shrine or something, but nothing on a great scale. And he was the one who, with his share of the parents, of his parents and inheritance, laid the foundation for the first great stupa, as there is also one nowadays, that marks the spot. So, to clarify that, at the time when they went there, there was nothing much yet there. They became the founders of these great foundations that we know of nowadays. Now is the time is upon us again to dedicate whatever merit we have accumulated here for the sake of beings. When doing so, let us particularly also think of those who just a couple of weeks ago have perished in the earthquake that happened in eastern Tibet, centered around the small town of Jiku. Lots of Tibetan people, lots of Chinese people who live there have died, several thousand of them for that matter. And also lots of other beings have been killed or have been injured greatly. So let us dedicate the merit now with their particular plight in mind. Let us dedicate the merit particularly for those who have died and those who are still there alive but suffering intensely.